Hey folks, you know I take my trail camera intel pretty seriously. It's a huge part of how I build my hunting strategy, and I'm always looking for gear that just flat out works. Stuff I can rely on. Backed by solid people and the best customer support in the business. That's exactly why I run Tacticam Reveal cell cameras. Whether you're just getting started or you're a full-blown data junkie like me, they've got a camera to fit your budget and your hunting style. My go-to currently is the Reveal 3.0 series with fully integrated GPS. These things are dead simple to set up. Less fiddling, more scouting and hunting. And they run on most major service providers and will automatically connect you to the strongest signal in your area. So no more hiking to the top of a ridge just to realize you've got the wrong service provider. Been there, not fun. Here's the kicker. You don't even need an SD card. That means fewer trips in, less pressure on your spots, and more real-time intel sent straight to your phone. And if you pair it with a Reveal solar panel or a lithium cartridge, you can keep those cameras running longer and spend more time doing what actually matters. Scouting new ground, dialing in a setup, or maybe, just maybe, finally cleaning the garage like you told your wife you would before the season started. Don't just take my word for it. Check out Tacticam Reveal at tacticam.com. Tacticam. Everything you need to take your hunting to the next level. Stay more comfortable, more concealed, and in the stand longer with Oscio gear. Premium camouflage apparel created for bow hunters by bow hunters. Oscio's revolutionary patented camo patterns and innovative features are designed to keep whitetail bow hunters totally invisible and dead quiet. Elevate your game with Oscio. Visit asiogear.com and take 20% off your purchase with code TRUTH20. If you're like me, e-scouting isn't just part of the process, it is the process. And nobody's doing it better than Spartan Forge. This is a veteran-owned company that built the only science-based scouting platform on real GPS collar data and artificial intelligence to predict deer movement. But where it really shines is with their imagery. Spartan Forge now has a high-res UAV coverage for 80% of the whitetail states, down to 5-centimeter detail. That means you can see trails, old logging roads, cuts, even subtle vegetation changes that most apps completely miss. And if you really want to get nerdy, their LiDAR layer breaks right through the canopy so you can see the forest floor. Gives you some visibility to those hidden draws, ditches that big bucks absolutely love to live in. Add in historical wind data and a desktop-only features like Eagle Eye and Cyber Scout, and you've got the most advanced hunting app out there. Start your risk-free 14-day trial today at spartanforge.ai. Welcome to the Truth from the Stand Deer Hunting Podcast, brought to you by Tacticam Reveal Cellular Cameras. I'm your host, Clint Campbell, and you're listening to episode number 467. Today, we are recapping my recent travel hunt and the lessons learned, so stay tuned. All right. What is up, everyone? Happy Wednesday to you. Hope you're doing well. Hope you are feeling fine. If you're watching the video, you can tell my surroundings have changed. I am back home from the hunting trip. I got in, I think Sunday, if I'm not mistaken, is when I got back. Long drive. Glad to be back. Feels good to actually, after 3 weeks, feels good to sleep in your own bed, get a shower in your own shower, get back to a routine, get back to the gym, do all the things that you're kind of used to doing, and that is, your normal everyday life. I had a blast while I was out. It's I always look forward to that trip and living in the trailer, even though it's some like rough accommodations, if you will, right? Like I always say it has everything I need and nothing I don't. But after spending, 20 some odd days in it, was definitely, appreciative of the finer things that I have whenever I'm at home. So with that, this is going to be just kind of a wrap up podcast, kind of bring you guys through the last, several days that I was there essentially. And then maybe more so like when you have that long drive, right? Cause that drive is, I think it's supposed to be around 21 hours roughly, but pulling a trailer behind me, the stops, et cetera, it probably takes closer to like 23, 24, hours. So you have plenty of time to reflect, especially, when you come home with an unfilled tag, which was the case on this trip. When you're coming home, I've had both, right? I've had trips where it's like I've come home with the tag in my pocket still, and I've had the trip coming home with my tag filled. Those two drives couldn't be more different, for obvious reasons, right? The one where you have your tag filled, you kind of relive it over and over in your mind, which is fun to do. The one on your way home when you still have the tag in your pocket, you relive those moments over and over again, or the shoulda, woulda, couldas, if you will, kind of thinking about what you did wrong, what you could do right, or could have done differently, what things were out of your control, et cetera, right? Like all those things that we all kind of go through, even post hunting season, not just after a trip. It's oftentimes just even after a hunting season. So we'll kind of start from where we left off in the last update, which was that I lost access to that permission piece that I knocked on the door and got permission for. If you didn't see the previous video, it's because I wasn't able to upload that. It got messed up, so there's only an audio version. So if you want to see the captain's log prior to this one, you have to go listen to it on, wherever you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple, etc. But net was, those that have been keeping up, is I had a permission piece that I glassed a really good deer early, or late October. It was like the Tuesday before Halloween, basically. Got permission on that piece. Had been hunting that deer basically ever since, kind of keeping tabs and patterning him, and basically spent all the time that I had. I was still kind of qualifying pieces, in October and like that first couple of days into November to try to get a bead on where some deer were at. And this was the most consistent place that I had found. And so I knocked on the door, got permission, kind of started picking away at this deer from the outside a little bit. And this is all like in the captain's log. So I'm just kind of giving the Cliff Notes version of this to get up to speed of where we're at today. And, had a couple different hunts for that deer as I kind of started figuring out what was kind of happening, how they were using this particular area. Started getting a little closer. At the end of the day, I ended up having 3 encounters. I ended up having 3 encounters with that deer at 25 yards. All 3 encounters were at 25 yards. I, of course, was using a stick bow, right? So I needed to get him within 20 yards or closer. Was kind of like my comfort zone. There was another good deer that was in that area. I would have been willing to kill him. He just wasn't nearly as active. I think this particular deer I was trying to kill was like the bully on the block. Like he ran the place, I think is really what was kind of going down. The last look I got at him, I kind of thought he was probably like a 150-inch deer, roughly. I got the last 2 looks I got at him. I actually got to spend a little time with him since he was just out of bow range, and just watch him, or just out of longbow range and just watch him. And he wasn't a Boone and Crockett deer. What I will say though is that he was over 150. How I would phrase it is that he was bigger than 150, slightly smaller than 170 would be how I would kind of categorize him. So 60-ish deer is probably what we were looking at. So the net was that I ended up losing access to that piece. And I talked about this. Some other guys had permission. They got mad that I also had permission. They spoke with the landowner and basically asked me to get booted off the piece. And that's what happened. So at that point, I'm getting kind of late in the trip because my intention was really to kind of try to stay until Thanksgiving if I had to, right? That was really kind of when I went out on this trip, it was like, hey, if I need to stay till Thanksgiving, I can. It's a 2-day drive back, so I would had to have left, by basically that Monday to drive back. Actually, probably 3-day trip back because I would be back to work, right? Because my vacation basically ran through the 18th. So if you're listening to this, the day it comes out on Wednesday, it would have been yesterday was my last day of vacation. So today as I'm recording this. And so the rest of the trip was going to be back to what I was doing previously, so that last week of October into the first part of November, which was, working during the day and trying to get out to glass or whatever the case is, either before or after work. Reality is that, as late as it was getting light out, doing anything before work was probably going to be a no-go, especially because I have to factor in drive time and stuff like that. And most of the places I was hunting, weren't just around the corner from me. Like they were still usually like a 30-minute drive, 35-minute drive, 40-minute drive, just depending on what piece I was going to. And so getting out after work was kind of the same deal after the time change, where it was going to be really hard for me to get to anywhere where I could glass or get on a deer or hunt after work. So, that really kind of dawned on me after the time change. I mean, I knew the time was going to change and stuff like that, but my thinking was like, well, if that's the case, it's fine, because by that time I should have, I don't want to say deer figured out, but I should kind of know the areas I'm going to spend time in. And so I can dive in with like an hour and a half of light and put on a hunt or glass or whatever the case is, because I've got pockets of deer located, right? So what I will say is that locating these pockets of deer, for this trip specifically, was more challenging than in trips past, is what I will say. Even with familiarity with the area, the amount of pressure that I had seen in this area far surpassed the previous seasons. Now, I don't think there was more guys, because I don't think tag allotments have changed. But what had happened, which is absolutely true, is that the amount of walk-in access property available in this area was super diminished. There were so many pins that I had marked on pieces that I've either hunted, scouted, or glassed in the past, that just were no longer available. And so I don't think there were more people. I think there was just the same amount of people, but just fewer options and fewer places for people to go. And so every piece in the area, when I say area, it's like I was driving sometimes, the furthest south I made it was probably an hour and a half away from where I was staying, roughly, so just say like within an hour of where I was at, east and west, like north and south, was, basically would have a truck on it, right? And all these pieces, like all of them aren't terribly big, right? And so if there's a truck and there's like one good drainage, it's like, be really hard to get into this area without potentially boogering up another guy's hunt, which you don't want to do. And so that was one kind of limiting factor. And so whenever, I lost access and was hunting that particular deer, I was in a position where I was kind of starting over. And I was at the end of my vacation time, like the time I would need to, locate more deer, or maybe even pull camp and change areas, which is something I considered doing. And at the same time, we were getting, 80 some odd degree days, et cetera, et cetera. So it was kind of the perfect storm where, I had spent so much time, and rightly so, patterning this specific deer. And then whenever all that kind of went out the window, I didn't have other groups of deer, kind of located, if you will, because I was kind of spending my time there to kill that one. And truthfully, had my opportunities, right? You get that close that many times. It was just, I felt like it was just a matter of time. If I could stay on that deer, I was going to eventually get him within 20 yards and would get an opportunity. And so the weather changed, things got hot. I spent a couple of days trying to locate deer. Chad got into camp, I guess it was like a Saturday or whatever the case was. And, while I was hunting that deer, he was still out glassing, and I would say, hey, I saw some deer here. I saw some deer here. He and I share intel freely with each other about where we've seen deer. And, he was, driving all these places, trying to get in to scout them, and, glassing some spots. And it was just to the point that, he ended up we ended up not kind of staying at camp together, because, he was just he was basically where I was at whenever I lost permission on that piece, which was like trying to find where the deer are at, right? And trying to find a place where, isn't being overrun with people. So what he ended up doing was driving roughly 2 hours south of where we were at, down to a piece that he's hunted in the past, actually where he killed, on one of the trips that we previously were on. And he ended up heading down there, just because there were fewer people. Now there's not as much property, if you will, which is why a lot of people gravitate toward the area that we were in. But you definitely are dealing with fewer people. And he got on an absolute hammer, and he and I'll talk about probably at some point. But, he got on a deer that was probably like in the pushing mid to upper 180s, and just a tank of a deer. And he had a couple other really good encounters. But just to kind of give you an example of like, you know, he got out there trying to locate deer, pressure everywhere, you know, made it really hard to kind of find a place to, I don't say find a place to hunt, but find a place where you feel good about, where you're not just hope hunting, right? Because when you go on these trips, like, you don't really want to hope hunt, like, especially with the amount that you can see, like, you're really trying to find something and know that something is in the area that you want to hunt and kind of go after it, right? And so, you know, weather heated up, was looking for deer to hunt at that point. And then I started kind of looking at the forecast and kind of starting to play things out in my mind, trying to make some decisions, because, you know, without having a bead on something or a group of deer that I can kind of use, even groups of does, like I wasn't even necessarily saying like, hey, I need to find a big deer. I was just saying, I need to find like where there's a congregation of does. Cause that was the thing that I've kind of learned in this area, is that it's, obviously when you're hunting the rut, you know, bucks get silly, they expose themselves a lot more, and so they become more visible, right? But when you're on these travel hunts, at least for me, it's like I want to try to find where they're going to spend time, right? And so what I've kind of found is that if I can find a place that has like the right habitat, right? So there's a couple hidey hole pockets and the right amount of like the right things, and I can find a congregation of does, like a doe family or two that are living in the general vicinity, that's probably where I'm going to spend time, because there are going to be, you know, probably not just a buck, but there are probably going to be multiple deer that are going to make their way through that area because there's opportunities there for them, right? And that's kind of what has played out, and that's kind of what I've watched, and that's kind of what I've focused on, is like find places where it's like is holding a pocket of does, a doe family group or two, right? And that's what that piece had going on that I was hunting, and I just wasn't finding anything, you know, and I don't think Chad was either, finding anything like that where, you know, I could say, yeah, some of these does may have been bred already, but there's 8 does that live here. Chances of all of them having been bred already are low. And so I'm going to spend time here and just watch, because of sooner or later, you know, within the next couple of days, there's going to be another deer that wants to slide through here and do some scent checking, whatever, and try to see what's happening, right? And so I was trying to kind of evaluate, like, hey, I wasn't finding any pieces like that. And I hadn't found any pieces prior like that either, except the place I was hunting and one other place, but that place had people on it, every day. Like, it was hunted really hard, to the point to where it's like, I usually always saw deer there, and whenever I would slide by and glass it, because it was an easy place for me to get to and glass. So a lot of times I would start my day there if I wasn't hunting in the morning. And the deer visibility, just does in general, and knowing that there are a lot of deer in that particular area, glass in the morning and not seeing anything was very telling to me that, like, yeah, this place has been hammered. And I knew it had been, because I'd seen trucks there and I knew who was kind of hunting it. I'd met the guys that were hunting it. And so it just didn't make sense to spend a lot of time there. And so at that point, I started kind of looking at the weather going, you know, my only real option is probably, you know, Chad was leaving, like, cause he was only there for about 5 days. You know, we had a really good snap of weather when he saw the big deer that he was chasing. And when I had, like, most of the encounters that I had, you know, we had temps that were in like the, you know, 11 degrees in the morning, you know, high might be 42 or 43, something like that. Like, those 3 days were awesome. And then, you know, it goes up to like the 70s and 80s. And it was just like someone turned a water faucet off. Like, the deer activity just went to nil. And then, so I was really trying to make a decision, like, do I pull camp and head south, and start over down there, but at least maybe be away from people, you know, or do I stay here and kind of see if I can locate something, right? So I ended up staying like another couple days after that, and I ended up back at a piece that I've hunted in the past, and was like, I'm just going to spend like a long morning here glassing and see if I can pick something up. Because at this time, and this was the piece that had been run hard, I had seen one good buck that I talked about earlier in the trip that I watched him get out of his bed. But at the end of the day, he was probably like 130-inch deer. And actually, 2 of the guys that I knew were hunting that piece, I ran into them in the parking lot the one day and was talking to them, and they had seen that deer and confirmed that he was like 130-inch deer. Um, but that was the best deer on that piece that I had seen on this trip, which was surprising to me, because in the past years, it's like I've seen some, in fact, it's where I killed the deer that I killed. And prior to that, I had seen deer that were, at least in the 50s, and one usually in like the 60s or whatever. And so it usually has really, really good deer, or at least like one or two of them on the piece. And so I knew that that was like probably the better deer that was hanging out in the area. Not saying that one can't cruise through, that certainly is a possibility, but I knew that it had been hunted hard. And so the does were even skittish and staying kind of hidden, if you will. So I ended up going back to that piece, glassing in the morning, and just figured I'd spend a long morning there and just see if something moves late, whatever the case is. Ended up glassing a doe, kind of, early in the morning. And I caught her like in this tree line, and she just was moving really, really weird, like which kind of felt like she was being pushed, or being not pushed, but bothered, if you will. Right. And so I try to kind of keep an eye on her. And then, a little bit later in the morning, I saw her pop out of this big brushy draw, which was odd to me, because usually when they get into this brushy draw, they kind of stay there, right? It's usually where they're going to bed. And she comes popping out, and I was like, oh, that's weird. Like, there's got to be something moving her around. And sure enough, there was a buck that was behind her, and he was trailing her maybe like by 30 yards or so, and threw the glass on him pretty far away. And, but I could tell he was just like, a basket 8, and would be a really good deer in Pennsylvania, but wasn't something I was going to necessarily spend time chasing there. Right. So I just kind of watched where they went, and that buck basically pushed her from one side of the property to the entire other side of the property, which is, I don't know how far they went. It was probably a mile, maybe a little bit more, but I was able to kind of watch them move from one side to the other, and, or from north to south. I was able to watch them. And, they went into this, like cedar thicket, the cedar line, and I kind of lost visual on them. And then I saw another little buck kind of come in as well, right? And so I was like, all right, there's a warm doe in the area. I was like, I'm gonna kind of play it cool here and see what happens, because clearly, like, this buck is bothering her. Another younger deer came in to kind of check the situation out, and he came from downwind. So suggests to me that if there's a good deer downwind of this, there's a possibility that he's going to end up making his move up. And if I can get eyes on him, glass him, I can either maybe make a play, or I can maybe wait till the evening and have, be able to put on a hunt and see if I can't make some magic happen. So that was kind of my game plan. So I just kind of watched, for, I don't remember what time this was. I probably saw them at like 8:30, maybe, let's say, or 7:30, somewhere between 7:30 and 8:30. And, as I'm sitting there, I see the buck, they went in and bedded, and then I saw a deer pop out again. And now they're pretty far away from me at this point. I want to say like they're close, like 1,000 yards away. And so, I took a look at him through my binos, and I could see him okay. I can see him pretty well, but it was like one of those things where I was like, that doesn't look like the same deer. Like, the deer that was with that doe initially was just like a basket 8, probably 125 inches is what I would guess, right? Just by what I could tell through the glass. But wasn't, not to sound like a jerk, but he wasn't anything that I was going to make a move on necessarily. I wasn't going to spend my morning chasing him, or my day chasing him. Right. But this deer that popped out, looked like a different deer. Now, the way this place sets up too, like the cedars that they're in, and the back side of those cedars, if we go to the west side of the property, it's like I can't see behind that once they get in there, unless they kind of crest this rise, then I can see them. But if they stay low, there's all kinds of CRP, that tree line's blocking me and stuff like that. So if they could pop out the back side, and actually there's corn a little further to the south, right at the edge of this cedar line. So they could easily pop out of this corn, or pop out of these cedars, take that tree line down, and hop in the corn and be gone. And I'd never know the difference. Right. So, and vice versa, a buck could come in from any of those directions as well that I wouldn't be able to see. Right. So I put the glass on him, and I'm looking at it, and I'm like, man, this just looks like a different deer, so, and I did pull out the spotting scope when I saw the deer initially earlier in the morning. That's how I kind of confirmed it. Hey, this is probably like a 125-inch deer. I'm not going to make a play on it.
So I had the spotter out, and I was like, I was convincing myself that this was the same deer, because I was like, I didn't see anything else walk in here, right? It's got to be the same deer. Threw the glass on the deer, or the spotting scope, and confirmed that it was a different deer, for sure. Rack was higher, just a better overall buck. Like I don't know what he would have went. He was probably 40 something would be my guess. If I had to put a number on it. So that was enough for me to where I was like, all right, I'm going to watch these deer. And if I can get them bedded, I'm going to make a stalk, or I'm going to make a play on the deer. So I waited, for a little longer. He went in and bedded, with her, and I didn't want to move, until I kind of knew that they had moved out of the area, if I could tell that, right? There was a couple things that were happening. So bird hunting season's in. This place gets bird hunted really hard too. And so typically what I would want to do is like sit and wait, watch them bed, watch them get up. And because I don't have a visual on them, probably wait and try to make a play in the evening, right? Is typically probably what I would do, or get myself close enough, because there's a destination food source that's not far off that doe's probably going to want to get to. And all things being equal, if they don't get bumped or whatever the case is, that's probably where they're going to head, or she's going to want to head and going to bring that deer with her, right? So that's typically the game you would probably play, or that I would play, right? But there's a ton of hunting pressure on this piece, so someone could pop in there whenever, right? Tons of pheasant hunting, or just bird hunting in general, on this piece as well, so they could get bumped by that. And so those were two things where, and I think it was a Friday, if I'm not mistaken. So like, I'm thinking in my mind, like, local people are going to get off of work and want to come out and run their dogs, right? And bird hunt. And so so that means, by 3:00, there's probably going to be people here. And so I need to kind of make this happen before then, was my guess. So I was talking to Chad, and my thinking was, I think this was like 9:30 at the time. And so I told myself, I was like, I'm going to give them an hour. I'm just going to watch and make sure they don't move. And if they don't move and get up and I don't see them, then I'm just going to assume they're in the same spot. I'm going to give them an hour. I'm going to start my stalk at like 10:30, right? Because I can get to like a certain area pretty quick and just be a couple 100 yards away that I got to kind of stalk, put on the actual stalk, right? I had a good wind for it, to stalk that particular spot. So I felt really good about that. So I'm watching, I'm kind of getting my stuff ready, and keeping an eye on them, got the binos on them, et cetera, et cetera. And 10:30 hits, and I'm just getting ready to kind of like, I was going to drive my truck to like a different parking area that I could use to get closer, and then start my walk to where like my stalk would start. And as I'm getting ready, I hear like machinery running, and I'm like, what is going on? What is that sound? Right. And I couldn't tell exactly where it was coming from. And then all of a sudden I see a huge tractor with a big sprayer driving right up through where I was going to walk to stalk. And they're driving right towards where those deer were at. And so I'm watching, and there's multiple layers of fields that are there, like with different stuff. Some of it, I don't even know what it is. It just looks like it's, maybe it was wheat at one point, but it's cut low. I'm imagining they baled it off or whatever the case is. I don't know. And then there's some other like green food sources. There's like the backside, there's like a cut bean field. Like there's all kinds of different stuff there. And so I've seen them come in and spray in years past. And they always spray this one certain type of field, whatever it has in it. And it's adjacent to the field that's adjacent to the cedars that they're in. And so they start spraying. And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, you got to be kidding me. Like, I can't catch a break, right? It's like, I'll lose permission on this piece. I spent a couple of days trying to locate a deer to hunt or find some deer, right? I finally find one, that I'm willing to stalk, or that's, kind of meets my goals or my criteria or whatever you want to call it. And I'm just getting ready to make a move, like literally getting ready to turn my truck on to go to where I need to go to start my stalk, and a tractor drives through, right? So that tractor ends up spraying that field. Another one goes to this other side of the access road that's there and sprays like another field. And when he goes over there, it's like, I'm kind of keeping an eye on that to see, like, cause I'm anticipating them to squirt out at some point and just like take off. Right. And so my thinking is if I can just watch them do that, they might just move maybe even to a better place to where they'll bed down to where I have a 100% visual on where they're laying. and maybe it'll actually be better for me. Right. So I'm watching, and that tractor gets a little further away. And then all of a sudden I look over and that buck pops back out. He's standing there. And they changed beds like maybe 50 yards. They were 50 yards further to the north. And then he just stands there for probably like 4 minutes. And window's back and he's looking the opposite way. And then he just walks back in and I presume beds back down. Right. And so I'm like, this is awesome. Like they're still there. Meanwhile, while that tractor's moving around, I also see a bird hunter that came over from the west side up over the top and is now bird hunting. Now, they weren't close to where this deer was bedded, but still, just like a comedy of errors or things that could go wrong were going wrong, right? Like tractor goes into spray, bird hunter in there, with his dog. So once the tractor kind of was far enough off and I knew they were kind of done in the area that I needed to get to, I was like, well, you know what? I'm just going to use the tractor as cover sound because I'll be able to move a little bit quicker if that's the case, right? Well, ended up not working out because they wrapped up quicker than I thought they would and actually got out of there, right? Which is fine. So now it's like I'm ready to go do the stalk. I get in there. Wind was good, and I got to like at this point I wasn't sure if they were. I shouldn't say I wasn't sure. I felt like they were still in there, but I wasn't 100% positive because I can't see if they came out the backside or not of this cedar piece. And so I'm stalking it and just I'm making the assumption that they're going to be there. So I get probably within 40 yards, I think it was, and my wind was good the entire time. It was a little funky in certain spots, the way like the habitat kind of is, but I had a good wind to stalk it. At times it wasn't necessarily 100, it wasn't always consistent, but it was good for me to get into where I needed to get to. And once I got within 40 yards, I felt like, okay, if they're bedded in here, they're going to be right here, right? And about that time, as would be the case on this trip, the wind switched all of a sudden. The only wind that I couldn't make work for this stalk was anything blown out of the east. And we didn't have an east wind. We had like a southwest wind we were supposed to. But you would get some like swirly stuff once in a while. And I'm sitting there, once I got to where I knew I needed to be and felt like I was on top of them. And again, I'm just kind of making an educated guess because I saw them from 1,000 yards away. It's like pinpoint a tree, like they're here, right? Get there 40 yards away from it. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, I just get like a big gust of like east wind. And that just literally blows right into where I think that they're at. All right. And then about that time, I hear, in this area, hunting, like you don't hear like that when deer are walking typically until they get really close because you're often in like grass and stuff like that. And there's not necessarily a lot of leaf cover, or leaves on the ground because there's just not a lot of trees. Right. So what you often hear is like a plodding, like a like you can hear feet hitting the ground, right? Is usually what you'll hear. And I'm sitting there and that wind blows. I'm just thinking to myself, like in the back of my mind, I'm going, I hope they're not there. I hope they're like another 40 yards away or 30 yards away, like south of me. That way the wind doesn't bump them and I still have a play like to try to get to them or try to call him out. Right. And so wind blows and I just hear the plodding of feet, like feet running, taking off. Right. I assume it was them. I still made the rest of the stalk in because there was like a little place where they could kind of dip down into, went up, set up the decoy, did what I was going to do, try to pick a fight. Nothing came out. So my assumption is that those two deer were in there. How close was I? I don't know. I was within 40, 50 yards. Like I was pretty much on top of them, close enough to hear that they took off. And I'm pretty sure that the feet that I heard were the two deer that I was trying to, or the buck that I was trying to stalk. So, came back from that. And, at that point, I started kind of thinking about, the rest of the trip because, I wasn't sure I was going to find another deer stalk in that area in general, or to hunt in that area in general. And I found one. But there wasn't a ton of activity. And so I was starting to think about, I've only got, maybe 2 days to try to figure something out, because weather's coming in on Monday, and Tuesday it was going to rain again. And if you followed along, like when it rains out there, man, those roads are like, you can't go anywhere, right? Like it's pretty much impassable. To where it's like you certainly can't get anywhere with any kind of efficiency, right? And so thinking about, the upcoming days, like, and going back to work, I'm like, man, like, if I'm short on daylight and I'm short on and I can't really drive anywhere, like, that's going to be real hard to like locate something. And to have the following weekend it's coming up, and I was like, if I could even just spend my time not even really hunting the following week, most of it, and just if I can just find some glassing points that I can go to and try to locate deer, then at least the following weekend I would have, to be able to actually hunt, right? I could hunt all day Saturday, all day Sunday. But when I started looking at the weather, it's like that wasn't even going to be a possibility either. It's like that was basically, in reality, that was basically like my last best opportunity with, the conditions that were coming in, and the time that I was going to have. And so at that point, I kind of realized that, like, hey, I've been here 3 weeks. It's a long time to be away from your family. I'm blessed to be able to spend that much time doing the stuff that I like to do, and that I should probably just call it. And so that's what I did. I ended up kind of heading back, packing up the trailer, and ended up leaving the following morning after that failed stalk. So started thinking about that stalk a little bit and what I could do differently, and I'm not sure there was a whole lot I could do differently on that stalk. I was kind of dealing with a lot of less than ideal circumstances. And I made the best play that I could based on what I knew to be true, right? And I think it's really all we can do. And Chad and I were kind of texting about this, because he headed home the day before I did. And we were texting about this as we were both driving. We weren't texting, we were using voice text, just so everyone's clear that we were being safe. And he asked me, he's like, is there anything you think you could have done differently? And my first instinct is like, there's always something you could do differently or better, right? And so my first thought was like, well, I could have maybe went to the back side of that piece, because there's a way I can get up to this rise and look down from the opposite side and see if maybe they were bedded on the opposite side, right? Is something I could have done. They could have easily been on the opposite side when I got there. They could have easily been within the cedars, which I think is where they were. I think they were tucked into the cedars because it was hot out. The sun was out. I mean, while I was putting the stalk on, I was sweating, and I was literally in a t-shirt and like a light ghillie jacket, like the Osseo leafy jacket, right? So I was wearing all light, or early season gear, and was still just sweating buckets on that stalk. And so I knew they were going to be in the trees, like under the trees, to avoid the sun. And, I said, but maybe I could have went to the backside and glassed down from the other side, and maybe I could have seen in a little bit better, and, he had a good observation, which, he said a lot of times, I don't forget exactly how Chad said it, but, he said this is something he's been thinking about for a while related to whitetails specifically, is that a lot of things in general in life you do, and you look back at it, and you have like hindsight's 2020, right? Like you have an experience, and then you look back on it, and you can always see like the things that you could have done differently or better, or whatever the case is. But whitetail hunting is one of those things where it's not really true, right? Because we don't know what may or may not have happened, in a particular hunt, what a particular deer might do, what those circumstances might have been, could they have gotten bumped? Could they have even been there? Like, there's so many things that are out of your control that it's one of the things that isn't 2020, right? And even it's funny because even as we hunt these deer, and we think a deer that we think that we know even, and we have this idea about who they are and what they're going to do, rarely is that true. Even when we kill the deer, we're like, he did this and that's how I killed him. I would say it's partially true. I think a lot of times we kill that deer and some of what we think is true came true and that helped lead us to filling the tag. But there's probably a lot that happened that we never accounted for, right? And so there's always an element of luck that's part of it that you can't discount. So it was just kind of an interesting conversation that we had that, like, you know, we think we have the answers, and then even in evaluating it after failing, we think we know what the answers are a lot of times to the test after we fail the test, but even still we don't know. But there's always value in kind of like thinking about, you know, what could have happened, what could I have done differently, because when you get into those situations the next time, you know, you probably run through all those things about what are all the variables, you know, and at least know what they are or be aware of what they are to put yourself in the best opportunity. So, you know, so that was kind of like the last hunt, and I ended up making my way home. Right. And so obviously I had a long drive, a lot of time to think, not that I wanted to necessarily, you know, um, evaluate every part of the hunt of what could I have done better, et cetera, et cetera. The biggest thing this year was really making the decision to use a longbow, right? I was determined to use the longbow while I was out there this year. That's one of my goals, is to kill one, you know, in the plains, with traditional equipment. And you could say to a degree that that's what kind of bit me in the ass, right? Because I had a big deer within compound range on 3 different times, right? Because using the compound, probably fill my tag in home a week earlier even, right? You know, and I started thinking about, you know, was that a smart move or not, right? You know, should I have brought the stick bow and just said I was going to hunt with the stick bow in general? I think my learning from that is that, at least for the time being, I think I'm going to use the longbow while I hunt Pennsylvania. I think on travel hunts, I'm going to use the compound going forward until I have a lot of, I don't want to say a lot, until I have what I feel is enough experience with the longbow taking animals, in setting up for a longbow shot consistently. Because that was the biggest thing, I think, for me. You know, what I will say is that, well, let me get back to that. The reason being is that because, you know, there's a lot of time, you know, varying levels of money and commitment that go into taking these trips, right? Whether you're going to a plain state, whether you're traveling an hour away, 2 hours away, whatever the case is, whatever your trip entails. But for me, it's usually kind of a far trip, right? It's usually like I'm not driving just a couple hours. It's like, usually it's, you know, like this trip, 20 plus hours drive, right? There's costs associated with that, you know, at minimum fuel and things like that. So, and it's not necessarily always all about the filling of the tag. It's about the process, the journey, the kind of the experience. And I totally enjoy that, but I'd be lying if I didn't say that I'm not at the point yet where I can watch those caliber of deer walk away from me. I'll put it that way, right? My buddies that hunt traditional, that are really good at it, have been doing it a long time. That was one of the pieces of advice that they gave me early on, was that, you know, when you decide to make the switch, like, you've got to be at a point where you're willing to watch deer walk away from you, right? And I had that in PA this year. I watched a shooter walk away from me, right? Because I didn't like my shot opportunity. That stung, but that wasn't terrible, right? The ones on this trip, those hurt a little bit, right? And I'm just going to be honest, it's because of the caliber of the deer, right? And the age of the deer that I was chasing. You don't get that all the time where I live. And so that is a unique experience, at least for me, right? I do get some better age structure whenever I go to the mountains, but local to me, you know, I'm not getting anywhere close to those caliber deer, and definitely not that age structure, right? And so I think for me, the longbow will be something that I use in PA and continue to kind of refine that approach. And then eventually I'll be okay with, I think having deer of that caliber walk away from me and use a traditional bow whenever I go on these trips. But I think in the near future, in the immediate future at least, these trips like this are going to be more compound related because of, I don't get to do them every year necessarily. Some of these states are, point states and stuff like that. And so I think that's just a personal preference for me. I think that was one of the learnings, is that, like, hey, you probably bit off more than you can chew. Not necessarily in shooting the longbow per se, because I felt confident in my shooting. It's just, you have to look at the woods a little bit differently, which brings me to my next point, is that even though I missed those opportunities, or not missed, but was just outside, those opportunities or those encounters were just outside of stick bow range for me. Carrying the stick bow this season, particularly, on this trip, and being dedicated to it. Because I'll be honest, I had my compound with me, and that was really just because I heard a story of a buddy of mine at one point who was using a traditional bow and put his bow on top of his cap of his truck and then drove down the road and then never saw the bow again. Right. So I was like, that sounds about like something I would do. And so I took the compound and left it in the trailer just in case I did something stupid like that. But I was committed on this trip to that tool. So the one good thing that kind of came out of it, or there's a lot of good things, I should say, but the one thing that I kind of go back to is that just in this one short trip, when I say short trip, this one portion of the season, or this season in general, and it's not over yet. I'll just say, and particularly in these 3 weeks and the previous hunts that I had in PA, because I think at this point, between PA and this trip, I think I've been in the woods with a stick bow close to 30 hunts, roughly. The one thing for sure that I've learned is that it's made me a better hunter, 100%, just in this one season. Because the one thing I can look back on, right, and can look back on with 2020 hindsight, is my setups, right? And it's a hard way to learn a lesson whenever you have, a big deer within range and you can't get him killed. You quickly kind of see and understand the difference between a longbow setup versus a compound setup, right? And each time I had an encounter with that deer, it was painfully obvious where the right setup was for the tool that I was using. And it wasn't big adjustments. And that's the thing. A lot of times, killing deer, I'll use a football analogy. I think it's from Mike Tomlin. There's a fine line between drinking wine and squashing grapes, right? And that is such a good analogy for the difference between compound setups versus longbow setups. They weren't huge moves. It was more thinking about where is the deer I'm trying to kill, or a deer, if you're trying to kill any deer, where is that deer going to put its feet, right? You have to start to think to that, level of specificity. It's no longer what area is he going to pass through, right? And I was still setting up, how can I get closer to the area he's going to pass through, right? And I was still just outside, right? And so the mind change, or the shift in my mind, in those setups, is where is that deer going to put his feet? What precise area is he going to walk through? What precise spot is that deer going to walk through? And where is he going to potentially stop, right? If he's going to stop, right? And so that was probably the biggest learning thing for me. And so, I look at it like this, that is, like I said, I'll continue to use a stick bow in PA, most likely, unless there's a giant that I'm chasing, of course, but then I might make a change. But by and large, I think that'll be my default weapon in PA. The travel hunts, I'll go back to a compound just because, I I'm investing a lot more in that. And so I want to leave less to chance, if you will. But even just using that stick bow kind of mentality should put me in, take me from having 26, 27 yard shots with a compound to having 12, 15, 20 yard shots with a compound, right? Which it was just that observation in real time that I had, that as I was driving home, I was trying to find the silver lining in some of this stuff, right? And what it really was that I could already tell that by the end of this trip, I was looking at the woods differently and where I needed to be differently and how the deer is going to move through differently and where might they stop. Looked at that differently. I think it just changes your perspective. And I would encourage anybody like to spend a season doing it. Because for me, I think academically I understood it because I had a bunch of friends tell me that that's the case, right? That use a longbow or whatever the case is. But I think until you actually see it and recognize that, yeah, I was just 5 yards off on my setup, right? Doesn't seem like a lot until 5 yards is a quarter of your overall range, right? Then it's a lot. It's 25% of my capability, right? Is 5 yards with a longbow. And so you might as well be 100 yards away at that point because there's nothing you can really do about it. So that was my big learning. I think that's the silver lining. Is I think it's going to make me a better hunter. I think it's going to make me look at the woods a little different. Man, I had an appreciation for the trip. It was awesome. I had a blast. I saw some really good bucks. I had some really good encounters. That's the other silver lining is that, we don't always get to fill a tag. I was trying to commit to a process this year and I was hopeful to come out the other side of trying something new with success, a success story in terms of a filled tag. But I think maybe if that happened, I may not have gotten as much out of the hunt per se, right? I think, what I encountered, the encounters that I had and just being slightly out of range, I think is the thing that's going to pay dividends for me as I go forward. And then I also think that, I'll probably spend a little less time, focusing on one area. I think that was the other thing that kind of maybe made a mistake. Like I knew what those deer were doing. And so I spent probably too much time there versus like just hunting when I knew I needed to be there. I probably should have spent more time kind of prospecting other areas. Which I did a lot of. So it wasn't like, maybe that's not a fair assessment because I spent like a week and a half kind of just driving glass and hunting, but, spending a lot of time just locating deer. But maybe if I would have prospected, another day or two, a little further south and actually had some groups of deer in the south that I could have went to and been like, yeah, I know where they're at. Like, so even when the weather comes in, the rain comes in, I can wait a couple of days and just sit it out and know that those deer are going to be there. And then once the roads dry out, then I can go, and I know where they're at. Right. But I mean, I don't know that I would necessarily change a whole lot about what I did from that standpoint. Cause I kind of did what I needed to do early in the trip was kind of find myself some opportunities. Opportunities just didn't work out. And then there was some human influence as far as pressure and people getting angry that I had permission and losing access. Right. So, but that's that, man. The trip is over. There's still some hunting to do here in PA. I do some, when you're gone for 3 weeks, you have some, honeydew stuff or some time to spend with the family before you get before you feel real good about running back out to the woods. So I'm kind of in the, let's put some time in phase right now. And truth be told, missed my girls, my wife and my daughter. I love spending time with them. And so I'm just really kind of spending some time with them right now and looking forward to the Thanksgiving holiday and all that stuff that kind of comes along with that. So that's the update. That's the trip. That's what I think I learned, on this trip. Those are the things that I think are the reasons why I think I'll be better, going forward. And, yeah, just looking forward to the rest of the season. Hope you guys are having a great rut. Still some great hunting to be had right now if you're able to get out. Pennsylvania gun season is getting ready to kick off. So good luck to everyone who's getting ready to do that as well. And if you're out there still grinding, keep at it, man. Just a snap of a finger and your whole season can change. So as always, thank you all for listening.
All right, folks, that is a wrap for today's show. I'd like to thank all of you for listening. And if you haven't yet, please head over to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating, and be sure to subscribe to the podcast. And hell, while you're at it, head over to YouTube and give us a sub there too. I'd be super appreciative if you do those couple things for me. And before I shut this thing down, I need to give a big shout out to our partners who continue to help us make this podcast possible. Tacticam, Osseo Gear, Hawk Optics, Face Off E-Bikes, and Lathrop & Sons Boot Company. And until next time, we'll see y'all.